August 2nd, 1990, the world stunned. On August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein shocks the world when Iraqi forces launch a sudden invasion of Kuwait. Yet just 6 months later, his once confident army is retreating before a U.S.-led coalition in the First Gulf War. How does Saddam's triumph in Kuwait turn the Western, Arab, and even Soviet powers against him, ending in a devastating defeat after only 100 hours of fighting? Saddam Hussein triumphant, but bankrupt. In 1988, Iraqi President Saddam Hussein signs a ceasefire that ends a brutal 7-year conflict with Iran. The war has left 600,000 Iraqis dead or wounded, achieved few territorial gains, and plunged the nation into immense debt. Baghdad owes $80 billion to foreign lenders, and rebuilding devastated regions will cost another $230 billion. His million-man military, the fourth largest in the world, consumes a staggering 40% of the country's GDP. Unemployment is high and oil prices have crashed. Saddam urges OPEC to raise prices, but Kuwait and the United Arab Emirates refuse to limit production, keeping prices low to protect their own interests. For Saddam, these economic woes threaten his grip on power. His regime depends on generous military and social spending, and cuts could fuel unrest or invite internal rivals. Throughout the 1980s, Saddam has brutally suppressed Shiite minorities, including the Faili Kurds, for allegedly siding with Iran. But now, a possible solution to his economic and political troubles lies next door, in tiny Kuwait. Kuwait holds $10 billion of Iraqi debt and continues pumping oil above OPEC limits. Saddam concludes that demanding cash and debt forgiveness could solve his crisis. He also insists that Iraq deserves compensation from the Gulf states for having protected them from Iran's revolution. In February 1990, he pressures Jordan and Egypt to urge the Gulf monarchies to provide $30 billion in aid, warning that stability depends on it. To underscore the threat, Iraqi forces stage military drills along the Kuwaiti frontier. By May, Saddam tightens the pressure further at a summit in Baghdad. Warning: for every single dollar drop in oil prices, our loss is $1 billion a year. War is fought with soldiers, but also with economic means. Those who reduce prices are waging war against Iraq. We can no longer endure this pressure. Friedman and Karsh, or 6. The Emir of Kuwait dismisses his demands as absurd. Infuriated, Saddam turns toward military options. On July 15th, 3 Iraqi divisions, 35,000 troops, and over 300 tanks advance toward Kuwait. Saddam accuses Kuwait of conspiring with world imperialism and Zionism, framing his potential invasion as a defense of Arab unity. Kuwait rejects what it calls threats and blackmail. The Gulf states, fearing escalation, urge Washington not to overreact. On July 17th, the U.S. pledges to protect the sovereignty and integrity of Gulf nations, warning that Iraqi dominance could endanger global oil security, threaten Israel, and undermine nearby smaller oil states. By July 27th, Iraq has massed 100,000 troops near the Kuwaiti border. Yet most observers dismiss it as posturing. All the assurances we received said not to worry. Yes, tensions exist, but the Iraqis wouldn't attack a fellow Arab, recalls a U.S. official. Frontline, but Western and regional analysts have gravely underestimated Saddam. At dawn on August 2nd, 1990, Iraqi tanks and troops pour into Kuwait, the invasion of Kuwait. At 2 a.m., the elite Hammurabi and Medina armored divisions roll across the border with 1,000 T-72 tanks, while Republican Guard commandos descend on Kuwait City by helicopter. Resistance is minimal. Kuwaiti troops and aircraft are quickly overrun. By nightfall, the Emir of Kuwait flees, and his brother dies defending the royal palace. Within 48 hours, Iraq occupies all of Kuwait, seizes $2 billion from its central bank, and effectively doubles its oil reserves. The UN Security Council unanimously condemns the invasion and demands an immediate withdrawal. Saddam expects his lightning victory to prevent international retaliation, but it unites his enemies instead. The invasion alienates Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak, while the overthrow of a Gulf monarchy alarms Saudi and Jordanian kings. Saddam has upset the delicate balance of Middle Eastern oil production, endangering the wealth of regional states. In the West, the attack is viewed as naked aggression against a friendly nation. U.S. defense officials fear Iraq may next move on Saudi Arabia, threatening vital oil supplies. It's a stark reversal from the quiet American support Iraq received during its war with Iran. Even Moscow, a longtime ally, is blindsided. Soviet investments in Kuwait are at risk, and Premier Mikhail Gorbachev quickly informs Saddam that the USSR will not back him. Iraq now controls Kuwait, but surrounded by hostile powers, Saddam's bold gamble begins to look reckless. On August 6th, the UN imposes a sweeping embargo on Iraq, whose economy depends on oil exports for 90% of its revenue. That same day, Saudi King Fahd invites U.S. forces into his kingdom to deter any Iraqi advance. Saddam likely has no real plan to invade Saudi Arabia, but the Saudis are deeply unnerved. The coalition against Iraq. 2 days later, on August 8th, U.S. President George H.W. Bush addresses the American people. At my direction, elements of the 82nd Airborne Division and key Air Force units are arriving in Saudi Arabia to defend its homeland. First, we demand Iraq's complete and unconditional withdrawal from Kuwait. Second, Kuwait's legitimate government must be restored. Saudi Arabia agrees to host coalition troops. Jordan, overwhelmed by refugees and wary of Iraq's ambitions, sides with the coalition. British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher pushes for firm action, while France, angered by Iraqi troops storming its embassy in Kuwait, also commits forces. As up to 200,000 Kuwaitis and foreign workers flee to Saudi Arabia, they report looting and killings, fueling public outrage. One refugee recalls, "Iraqi soldiers came to our house searching for weapons, for proof we were Kuwaiti. They took everything, passports, IDs, everything." Although some reports, such as claims of babies killed in incubators, are later exposed as false propaganda. The emotional impact strengthens support for intervention. Saddam attempts to divide the coalition before it fully mobilizes. He accuses the U.S. of being controlled by Israel, hoping to fracture Arab unity, but Israel stays silent, avoiding provocation. Then Saddam takes hundreds of foreign nationals from 49 countries hostage, promising their safety if the coalition halts its plans. The move only hardens international resolve. One by one, nations commit to the effort, from sending aircraft or ships to offering money and troops. Eventually, 42 countries join the coalition, with the US, UK, France, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Kuwait at the forefront. As coalition strength swells, Saddam orders massive defensive lines around Kuwait. The line in the sand is drawn. Operation Desert Shield. To sustain the buildup, an enormous logistical mission begins in Saudi Arabia. Operation Desert Shield. Saudi ports operate around the clock as U.S. transports unload weapons, vehicles, and supplies. Engineers lay new highways for endless convoys. And over 1,000 cargo planes deliver equipment. Within 3 months, the U.S. alone has deployed 157,000 troops with tanks, artillery, helicopters, and aircraft, supported by ammunition, food, uniforms, and medical gear. A 1,000 square kilometer training area is set up to acclimate soldiers to desert warfare. The operation consumes more than 75 million liters of fuel daily. Alongside American forces, divisions from Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Britain arrive with the backing of other allies. 10 Iraqi divisions entrench along the front, protected by deep trenches filled with oil, vast minefields, and pre-sighted artillery. Saddam's elite Republican Guard forms the reserve, while regular units man the lines. Believing the West lacks the stomach for heavy losses, Saddam assumes his defenses will hold. On December 6th, he releases all remaining foreign hostages, hoping to avert war, but the coalition is already preparing to strike. The UN sets a final deadline for Saddam to withdraw by January 16, 1991. Some coalition members fear he may only make a partial retreat, keeping some control over Kuwait while undermining the justification for coalition intervention. U.S. Defense Secretary Dick Cheney stresses that the U.S. will not accept half measures. Original audio. It doesn't mean a partial withdrawal. And it doesn't mean he gets to keep 10, 20, or 30% of what he stole. It means full, complete, and total withdrawal of Iraqi forces from Kuwait. He should understand that the president has access to the full spectrum of capabilities, and if Saddam Hussein were foolish enough to use weapons of mass destruction, the U.S. response would be absolutely overwhelming and devastating. Ignoring the ultimatum, Saddam remains determined to hold his conquests despite the threat of coalition force. The coalition now launches Operation Desert Storm. At 3 a.m. on January 17, 1991, coalition forces begin a massive air offensive over Iraq. Some 2,030 coalition aircraft, including 323 U.S. carrier-based jets, take to the skies. Iraq's dense air defense system, made up of bunkers, anti-aircraft guns, surface-to-air missiles, and 300 interceptor aircraft, struggles to resist. Apache helicopters and cruise missiles strike radar stations first, blinding Iraqi defenses and clearing the way for the main assault. On the first day alone, the coalition conducts over 2,300 sorties, including with F-117 stealth jets. Within 3 days, Iraqi air power is neutralized as 44 airfields and over 500 aircraft shelters are bombed. Surviving Iraqi jets flee, giving the coalition total control of the skies. Lieutenant Colonel Waldo B. Cummings, Jr. recalls his first mission. As we entered Iraqi airspace, I saw the biggest light show I'd ever witnessed. Streams of red and orange tracers covered the darkness below. It seemed every Iraqi with a weapon was firing blindly. Several miles from the target, I nosed my plane into a 30-degree dive as Condor, my bombardier, locked onto the radar target. The area below erupted in fire and secondary explosions. Westermeyer. Baghdad is pounded with bombs and cruise missiles targeting the presidential palace, government buildings, and Saddam International Airport. Confused by decoys and hit by anti-radar munitions, Iraqi defenses managed to shoot down only 12 U.S. aircraft during the entire campaign. On the front lines, Iraqi soldiers worry about what's happening at home. One soldier from 3 Corps writes in his diary, "Some say Baghdad has been destroyed. Others insist it's only military sites. Others claim they've bombed civilians. You don't know who's lying. All the news is madness. The truth is lost." Westermeyer. As coalition forces prepare to invade Kuwait, Iraqi troops rig hundreds of Kuwaiti oil wells with explosives to devastate the country's infrastructure. Many wells are also hit by coalition bombing, creating massive fires that choke the skies with black smoke and turn day into night. Iraq retaliates by launching 86 Scud missiles at Israel and Saudi Arabia, beginning on January 18th. Saddam hopes to fracture the coalition by drawing Israel into the war, forcing Arab allies to withdraw. However, U.S. Commander General Norman Schwarzkopf dismisses the Scud's military value and praises Israel's restraint. Original audio, Norman Schwarzkopf. "I'd be more afraid standing in a lightning storm in southern Georgia than in Riyadh during a Scud attack. If it's going to hit you, it will, but the odds are tiny. Israel understands Saddam's goal is to provoke them into joining the war. Doing that would be exactly what Saddam wants, and not in anyone's interest. Though inaccurate, the Scuds pose a serious threat, prompting Israel to take precautions. Ultimately, Israel stays out of the conflict after the U.S. promises billions in aid and deploys Patriot missile batteries. Schwarzkopf also sends SAS and Delta Force teams to hunt Scud launchers. Saddam tries further provocations, sending troops across the border to seize the Saudi town of Khafji on January 29th. Though Iraqi forces briefly occupy it, coalition air and ground troops quickly retake the town. The Battle of Khafji underscores the overwhelming dominance of coalition air power. From January 24 to February 24, coalition aircraft fly over 40,000 attack sorties, striking command centers, naval bases, oil facilities, power grids, logistics hubs, and Iraqi forces inside pre-marked kill boxes. Under the relentless bombardment, up to 80,000 Iraqi conscripts desert. Coalition airstrikes destroy 1,185 tanks, 930 armored vehicles, and 1,155 artillery pieces. Finally, on February 24th, 500,000 coalition troops, backed by 340 attack helicopters, 2,000 tanks, and 2,000 armored vehicles, begin the long-awaited ground offensive. Air and naval bombardments precede the ground assault. Coalition commanders plan a sweeping left-hook maneuver to cut off Kuwait and trap the Iraqi army from the rear. CENTCOM, the American Central Command, takes charge of the western flank with U.S., British, and French troops, while Arab and U.S. Marine forces prepare to attack from the east. At the same time, Marine landing craft stage a decoy amphibious operation, keeping 2 Iraqi divisions pinned along the coast when the real offensive begins. In the west, the French 6th Light Division and U.S. airborne units surge ahead rapidly. The 101st Airborne Division alone advances more than 270 kilometers into Iraq using over 300 helicopters. After weeks of relentless bombing and mass desertions, Iraqi frontline troops are demoralized. By nightfall, coalition paratroopers have already severed Highway 8 between Baghdad and Kuwait, moving so swiftly that Iraqi resistance collapses and entire units surrender without a fight. In the center, American and British armored divisions push forward, targeting the key Iraqi logistics hub of al-Busayya before turning east to encircle remaining forces. Tanks equipped with bulldozer blades plow through sand berms and Iraqi trenches, burying some soldiers alive as they clear 24 minefield lanes and open a 16-kilometer-wide breach. Iraq's artillery and armor, already shattered by airstrikes, are unable to mount an effective counterattack. Marine divisions advance through rain, fog, and thick black smoke from oil trenches set ablaze by napalm. Despite the chaos, they smash through Iraqi defenses. Over 3,000 Iraqis surrender almost immediately as the 1st Marine Expeditionary Force advances 20 miles into Kuwait, capturing Al Jaber airfield and taking more than 10,000 prisoners. By the night of February 24th, coalition forces have broken through Iraq's main defensive line, but the fight is far from over. The elite Republican Guard Corps, held in reserve, now deploys to block the advance. Through the night and into the next day, coalition troops press forward across the front. Syrian, Egyptian, and Saudi units move slower but advance with U.S. 1st Cavalry Division support. Iraqi counterattacks are crushed with minimal coalition losses. In one 90-second tank battle, 13 M1A1 Abrams tanks destroy 35 Iraqi tanks, demonstrating the clear superiority of U.S. armor. Armed with a 120mm cannon and depleted uranium rounds, the Abrams can penetrate any Iraqi tank. Its stabilized gun and thermal imaging let crews fire accurately while on the move, an enormous advantage in the smoke and confusion of burning oil fields. However, those same fires also hinder coalition visibility. On February 26th, as the coalition closes in around Kuwait, U.S. armored units clash with forward elements of the Tawakkalna Division of the Republican Guard. Heavy smoke and desert winds limit reconnaissance and obscure the battlefield. Abrams tanks and Bradley fighting vehicles engage Iraqi BMPs and T-72s at close range. By the 27th, the coalition finally breaks through. 2 U.S. soldiers die from friendly fire. But American armor wipes out the Iraqi positions, destroying 30 entrenched T-72s without suffering losses. U.S. radar pinpoints Iraqi artillery sites, and counter-battery fire quickly silences them. The lightning pace of the advance leaves Iraqi commanders stunned, as they had expected a frontal assault from the south rather than a flanking strike from the west. Original audio, U.S. soldier. "We're about here at this northwest cloverleaf. We swung up, came through by the airport, and hit them from behind. Most of their guns were aimed south. They thought we'd attack straight through the city. There wasn't much resistance. We hit at night. They couldn't see us or shoot back. By the evening of February 26th, coalition forces have destroyed 24 Iraqi divisions. As retreating Iraqi troops flee Kuwait City, they are trapped on the road north by coalition aircraft. The highway becomes a scene of devastation. Hundreds of stolen civilian cars and military vehicles bombed and strafed into twisted wreckage. Global media dubs it the Highway of Death. Many Iraqis abandon their vehicles, but countless others are killed in the bombardment. The next day, the U.S. 24th Division captures Talil and Jalabah air bases despite heavy resistance. Along Highway 8, similar scenes unfold as coalition aircraft strike panicked Iraqi columns trying to flee westward. The Iraqi army has effectively collapsed. American, Saudi, and Kuwaiti troops enter Kuwait City, and the emir requests that his own forces be the first to reclaim the capital. Reconstruction, however, will take months, particularly the extinguishing of hundreds of blazing oil wells. Iraq's army is shattered and Saddam Hussein's regime is shaken but still survives. Iraqi uprisings. As Iraqi forces retreat, President Bush and coalition leaders face a decision. The coalition's mission to liberate Kuwait is complete, but Saddam's forces are regrouping. Many partners, especially Arab states, oppose invading Iraq or toppling Saddam. Encouraged by U.S. rhetoric, opposition groups see a chance to rise. The Voice of America broadcasts support for uprisings in mid-February, echoed by Bush on February 24th. Soon, revolts break out across Iraq. On February 28th, a ceasefire is declared, and Bush announces victory. Original audio, George H.W. Bush. Kuwait is liberated. Iraq's army is defeated. Our military objectives are met. Kuwait is once again in the hands of Kuwaitis. At midnight tonight, 100 hours after ground operations began, all U.S. and coalition forces will suspend offensive combat operations. In early March, disgruntled Shia soldiers in Basra rebel against the regime, seizing local buildings and prisons. Their revolt spreads through southern Iraq, while in the north, Kurdish Peshmerga forces rise up, capturing most northern cities with little resistance. Unlike the southern uprising, the Kurdish movement has clearer political goals, including calls for democracy. Soon revolts erupt in 14 of Iraq's 18 provinces. Coalition leaders disagree on how to respond. The U.S. favors a coup that keeps Iraq intact, fearing Iran's influence, rather than full regime collapse. They eventually deliver limited aid, send small support units for the Kurds, and enforce 2 no-fly zones over Iraq. Baghdad and the Sunni-majority regions remain loyal, protected by the Republican Guard, which is still largely intact and heavily armed. Disunity among rebel factions weakens the uprisings. Despite initial success, Saddam offers a false power-sharing deal on March 7th, then launches brutal counterattacks. Loyalist forces use tanks, helicopter gunships, and reportedly chemical weapons to crush resistance by early April. U.S. troops near the border do not intervene, though they destroy captured Iraqi weapons to prevent them from falling into rebel hands. Some Kurdish forces manage to hold out, establishing an autonomous zone under international protection. But many revolutionaries feel abandoned. Original audio, Othman Mahmoud. We were deeply disappointed. The Allies urged Iraqis to rise up, to remove Saddam Hussein. But when we did, they looked away and said, "It's an internal affair." The continuing economic embargo devastates Iraq's economy and public health. In the aftermath, Iraqi exiles lobby the U.S. to finish what was started in 1990. Aftermath. For the coalition, the Gulf War appears to be a decisive success. Casualties are low. Global support remains strong, and the mission goals are achieved quickly. The statistics reveal the imbalance. The coalition suffers 292 killed and 776 wounded, roughly half from accidents or friendly fire. The Kuwaiti army loses 420 killed and 12,000 captured. Iraqi losses are staggering, between 20,000 and 50,000 killed, over 75,000 wounded, and up to 175,000 captured. More than 1,000 Kuwaiti civilians and 3,000 Iraqis die during Desert Storm. Later uprisings and reprisals kill up to 180,000 civilians and rebels. In the war's aftermath, many veterans report Gulf War syndrome, a range of symptoms including fatigue and nerve disorders. Theories cite oil fires, depleted uranium shells, chemical exposure, or anti-nerve gas medication as possible causes. Up to 250,000 U.S. veterans, over a third of the combat force, report symptoms. Operation Desert Storm liberates Kuwait but leaves Saddam in power, enabling him to crush opposition brutally. Most coalition troops withdraw in 1991, leaving small contingents to enforce sanctions and no-fly zones. The war creates new political and humanitarian challenges, sparking debate in Washington about whether it ended too soon, a debate that will resurface in the years ahead. Saddam's invasion of Kuwait coincides with the final days of the Cold War, when for a brief moment, the world's superpowers found unity at the UN Security Council, something unimaginable only a few years earlier. Mikhail Gorbachev's attempts to reform the Soviet Union faltered, weighed down by crises like the Chernobyl disaster of 1986. For a deeper look at this era, Real-Time History produced Red Atoms, a documentary series exploring the Soviet nuclear age. Available exclusively on Nebula, the ad-free streaming platform built by independent creators. On Nebula, you can watch Red Atoms, 16 Days in Berlin, Rhineland 45, and more in 4K resolution, ad-free, and early. Access it via Nebula TV Real-Time History. Subscriptions start at $36 a year, or $300 for lifetime access, directly supporting the creation of historical documentaries like this one. Special thanks to Michael Adato for assistance on this episode. For more Middle Eastern history, check out our video on the Six-Day War. My name is Jesse Alexander, and this has been a production of Real-Time History, the only history channel that remembers the December 1990 New Japan Pro Wrestling Battle Final in Baghdad.